Today, I will have a conversation with my friend James Scott. I met James about 5 or 6 years ago at Pure House, a shared living experiment that grew out of my apartment in Brooklyn and into a precursor for the co-living movement. At the time, James was the COO of The Collective, a then co-living startup in London that has matured into a leading co-living operator with ambitious expansion plans. James is currently the co-founder of Stories, a socially responsible property developer in the UK committed to creating long-term sustainable value. Over the years, I've found James to be a thoughtful leader in the design of shared living typographies. I'm super excited to have this conversation with James today on the future of living. Without further ado, I present to you my friend, James Scott. On the topic of human connection, that's what's most relatable, is, just being real. Yeah, I can't imagine what it must be like to not be able to just roam around and go out freely.
Yeah, it's been an amazing learning experience, and it continues to be an amazing learning experience. I think recently it's become, and whether it's the dominance of our tech companies in our sort of modern societies, but it's become cool to feel like you're able to operate on a different level. You can use technology. You don't actually need to meet people. There's transfer of information online and things like that. And actually, I've noticed that I've sort of almost not wanted to rely on the fallibility of human connection in order to get things done. I've wanted us to be able to communicate on Slack. I've wanted data to be there such that I shouldn't find out about things through people. There should be, good information sharing, because that's what the internet allows. And I don't know where that mindset's come from, but I think what this whole experience, this last 12 months, has made you realize is that actually, it's a cliche, but business is still very much a people thing. It's organizing people to make things happen. And in terms of sort of the importance of human connection in terms of your well-being, just critically important. And I think, I spend a lot of time getting very fascinated about artificial intelligence and simulation theories, and this idea that we can recreate everything that we need without human connection, and just sort of making us realize that we're still so far away from it has been quite, whilst it's been challenging to have been deprived of it, it's been good to feel confident to believe in it a little bit more.
Totally. It feels a bit like the fascination with like going to the moon when we still have so much to fix here. It's like, I myself am so fascinated by like all the coolest tech tools, this, that, and whatever. But ultimately they're making it so that I don't need to connect with humans in real life anymore. And at the same time, it's what I know brings me the most joy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I am truly grateful to be able to connect with you through.
Well, there you go.
Exactly.
Which we would never be able to do. We'd never be able to do normally. But maybe that would have spurred me to come to see you in Bali. I mean, it does look great. It does look great over there.
Yeah, it's surely. It's sunset time here, but doesn't that pool look inviting? Oh my God.
It does. Yeah, don't. It's not fair. It's not quite raining outside. I mean, it's nearly raining, but not quite. I think the strength of the wind is stopping the rain at the moment. So I'm not sure which one you'd rather have. But anyway.
I was reflecting on the first time that we met. And I think it was when you and Ed rolled through Pure House back. I feel like
I remember
like 5
it so
years
well.
ago.
Yeah, so we Ed and I were over in New York on, I guess you'd call it a research trip. So Ed and I used to work together at The Collective, as you well know, Ryan. And yeah, we were doing a little bit of undercover sort of market research. So we actually we had a couple of very polar opposite meetings actually on that trip. The first was yours. So we sort of snuck in as potential residents into one of your Pure houses. Is that right? And I'll never forget it. It couldn't have been more. I mean, it was New York, but it felt very West Coast. It was, one of the speakers was mother to one of the members of the house, and she was explaining, I think, her first sexual experience at the age of 15, dressed as Superman or something like this. And it was the first time I was ever introduced to the concept of showing your appreciation through clicking. So no place for applause, but acknowledging your appreciation through clicking. Everyone was giving each other hand massages and back rubs, and Ed and I were like, where are we? This is amazing. I genuinely never experienced anything like it. I've gone on, maybe I think I was a younger and naive man at the time, but yeah, that was very much I guess that authenticity of a pretty I remember was it in Williamsburg? Was it on the river?
Yeah.
In an old industrial building, and you had a bunch of rooms. It was very much sort of organic, and there's just an amazing energy to it. Slightly wide-eyed, coming over from London, not really expecting to see that, but an amazing experience. And then I think the next day we actually went to see one of the VPs at WeWork, and it was this complete opposite. Ed, still in his true style, I think, had a voice notes going on underneath the table, just sort of so we could play it back. But it was just this fundamentally diametrically opposed attitude to what co-living was, and very much at the WeWork end of the scale was all about scale and just maximizing and everything on steroids, and then as better reflected in the name, the community that you built felt much more authentic and pure ultimately. So just amazing to see that different approach to just a very narrow product within a much broader product, which is housing.
Yeah, it actually those two kind of juxtapositions makes me think about something that I would imagine maybe you think about sometimes, which is how do you design for authentic experience to thrive in such a way that we like to use this word so often, impact, but can allow for a healthy and sustainable business to thrive. Because I know with Pure House, it was very much an experiment. It was grassroots, and it wasn't built to be a sound financial business, but man, was it amazing. But then, you go into things, and not to knock on WeWork, but you go into a lot of these places that offer the promise of community, but because of the pressure of financial returns, oftentimes the focus is on, the product, and the perception of an experience that sometimes isn't there. And so I'm just really curious about your thoughts.
I mean, I think community's become a word which has been so bandied about and has been jumped on by all different, every sector now. Oh, everyone's trying to build a community, or they're trying to people feel like they need a community. And if we look at it in the context of housing, where I think it is probably most important, and we try and break down what community is. Really, it's a group of people that the people who are a part of that group feel a part of. They have sense of shared purpose or shared interests, or located close to each other. And the benefit and the importance of a community is what people give to it. So that sense of purpose that they get from it, but also in return what they receive in terms of support and care, and again a sense of belonging. Now, a manufactured approach to community is therefore very difficult. So if I'm an overlording company such as WeWork, it trying to create a playbook for how you create community is always going to be incredibly difficult, because fundamentally trying to direct this is what it's going to be makes it very difficult unless you have a very narrowly defined proposition of what our community stands for. So, why did it start around the hacker house idea? Well, it was young tech entrepreneurs or coders, and that group of people who all shared a sense of purpose, a sense of passion, coming together and sharing those experiences, sharing that space. And naturally, a community is going to form very well there. So I think, and thinking about what I do now as a developer, sort of more looking at much broader, more holistic approaches to housing, mixed-use developments. I think what we try and focus on is not so much saying how am I going to create the community that's going to establish itself here, but how do I, as the builder, create the capacity for community to form? Because ultimately, I'm only, there isn't a business model around creating it. I'm never going to be able to justify spending all the money to do all those things. So what I need to do is to put sufficient social infrastructure in place such that community can form. And that's going to then be the strongest form of community, because those people will have created it and it will be designed for and by them. So that isn't actually necessarily as difficult as we sometimes think it is. One of the things that we've been looking at the moment at Stories, my current business, is around suburbia. So particularly in light of the trends that we're seeing post-COVID, as people demand more space and access to nature, and their need to be in city centres is reduced. Yes, you're going to have the exciting digital nomads that will come over and see you, Ryan, in Bali, but actually the broad swathes of populations, particularly younger families, are moving more towards the suburbs, because it has historically and will continue to provide that balancing between the benefits of living in a city and that of living in the countryside. But what we need to make sure we do is not to recreate sort of suburbia of the 60s, which is sort of two cars on the drive, a semi-detached house and a long garden, and you have to drive everywhere. But how do we create wider pavements so people can gather? How do we put kitchens back in the front of houses so that they can look out and wave at their neighbours? How do we create little pockets of shared spaces, maybe like a village hall type vibe, where actually people can put on a little summer fete or a kid's birthday party and encourage people to stop and talk to their neighbours? How can we make it so that people walk everywhere, so they're more likely to stop and talk with their neighbours? So for us, it's very much about how do we design our schemes in such a way that we facilitate the opportunity for people to gather, for people to interact with each other, because it's from that people will start to build a community. And you play that back to sort of good business. For us, it's less about trying to necessarily monetize a community. It's more about saying, well, actually, let's say this is a long-term rental product, if we can create a place that has a strong sense of community for the people that are in it, they're going to choose to stay longer, they're going to have more respect for the places that they're living, and they're likely to stay longer. So it's not about trying to say, oh, I can charge £100 for this product and people will pay a £20 premium because they're part of this community. Because suddenly that's not a community. It's just not right. It's just not the way that it works. Actually, what we're saying is create a great product, create places people want to live, community being a part of that, and they're going to stay, and that's good business. And I think the most simple business philosophy is just create a really good product which is thoughtful and empathetic, and that's what's going to be successful and long-term viable business.
Yeah, amazing. So what actually inspired you to create Stories, and kind of what's your vision for the future of?
I mean, it's I think it was Richard Branson that said it's very easy to look backwards and pick the stepping stones that inspired you or led to where you are today. I mean, the reality is that I've been very fortunate to have the ability to put myself in these amazing experiences, and life's moved, it's moved in such a way that I find myself where I am. But I guess just to chart my sort of history very quickly, so had the most amazing opportunity to work very closely with Reza, who's the founder of The Collective. So coming straight out of university to work with him and get involved in his business right at the start, really. The more time I spend starting my own business, I realised the importance of those first few years, that the hard work that Reza did before I joined. So very grateful for the business that I joined. But an amazing opportunity to grow that business from sort of small house shares through to really, one of the most exciting co-living businesses, if not innovative development businesses in London and now globally. So an absolutely amazing experience that afforded me a huge amount of exposure and learning and opportunities to get very different broad perspectives. I left there in 2016 and sort of seeking the same set of challenges the same level of challenge and an opportunity to get as much perspective as possible. I chose to actually fly to Chile, where I bought a Mitsubishi Montero, which is a 4x4 and spent a couple of days building a little fold-out bed in the back of it, and then proceeded to spend the next year driving that car from the southernmost reaches of Patagonia in South America all the way to California. So over the course of a year, traveled 15 countries, 36,000 kilometers of driving, and just one of the most amazing experiences on so many levels. Yes, surrounded by beautiful, incredible nature, meeting amazing people, seeing very different ways that people live, but actually one of the most amazing things from that was the ability to read. So, whether it was Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens book one day, whether it was Eckhart Tolle's spiritual teaching the other. I remember having this really interesting moment where I was reading a book by, I think, Ray Kurzweil around AI and simulation theories, and then I read Eckhart Tolle's spiritual book, and I was like, hold on a second, this sort of modern science has sort of gone full circle, very close to this sort of religious and spiritual teaching. It was really interesting to have that perspective, which is what I was seeking, to learn and see the world in lots of different ways. Settled in San Francisco thereafter, spent 12 months sort of doing various different things, but towards the end of that 12 months, got in conversation with Rich Meyer, who amazing developer, responsible for many of the projects over at King's Cross in London. Really incredible, world-class regeneration project. And he and I, along with another chap, Paul Clark, who spent a lot of time advising public sector bodies, charities, other sort of institutional landowners about how to procure development partners, set up Stories, which I then moved back to the UK for about 2 years ago. And really, I think the vision and the purpose and why we've started that business is that I think the built environment is social infrastructure at its most core. Everything that we do, the opportunities that we have in life come from the spaces in which we inhabit, and I think that's never been more acutely felt. Yes, human connection, critically important, but our human connection happens within a built environment, and that built environment, be it nature and raw, or be it dense urban, is so fundamentally important to us. And as an asset class, it is fundamentally at the moment about maximising economic value and extracting that value for the benefit of shareholders. So I think what we wanted to do was to start a business that was putting development at the forefront as a positive tool for creating outcomes for people in its most pure sense, giving people the opportunity to live with purpose and pleasure, because we think that that's what drives fulfilment in life. And so what that translates to is doing development in such a way that we balance our responsibilities, yes, to making an economic return and being competitive, but also a responsibility to our environmental sustainability and our social responsibility. And so we're delighted that our first project in London is to be building a homeless centre for one of the leading homeless charities, St Mungo's, and facilitating that by delivering housing with a high degree of affordable housing in central London. So that's sort of what we're up to at the moment. We're a number of really exciting projects, from sort of large regeneration opportunities through to some of these smaller projects. Some of the products that I was talking earlier around how we look at suburbia again, but really with that guiding belief of let's use development as a positive tool to create outcomes for people, and balance that responsibility to what we call a triple bottom line.
Wow, beautiful. So what do you envision as kind of like what's next for Stories? Like, what's your big dream for where you want to take it?
I think we've always said that it's important for us. We believe that development is hyperlocal. I think we've moved away from this idea that you can sort of solve the housing crisis, or you can do development at mega scale and it's swathes of big brushes. And I think it's been really interesting and important to reflect on where some of the challenges of organisations like Sidewalk Labs, which have taken that sort of big data tech approach, and I think misunderstood the importance of the localness of development. Yeah, you can manufacture your homes in a factory, you can set policy, you can buy large chunks of land, but frankly, the development that you deliver on that site is creating something that real people care a lot about. You're coming into communities in whatever form they are and fundamentally changing that. And to think that that can't be done in a way that is bottom up and requires intelligent and thoughtful conversation at that local level, I think is wrong, and I think is naive. So we very much said that we want to focus on 4 or 5 really exciting major projects that we give our time to, along with our team, and creating a platform for really amazing people to help us on that. But I think, our broader aspiration is that we demonstrate that it's not okay to do development perhaps in the way it's been done historically, and ensure that sort of, we bring the tide up in terms of making sure that development, when it's done, is delivering against that responsibility that it has. We've been given this amazing opportunity as developers to shape our cities, to shape our towns, and we should therefore be doing it with a social responsibility. And I think hopefully what we can do is demonstrate that those landowners, those local authorities, those organisations that procure the developer can demand these outcomes. And we're already starting to see that filter through into sort of diversity requirements in teams, and setting objectives around affordable workspace and social housing. So hopefully we can, the bigger vision for us is how do we move the whole industry forward and actually take developer from what is quite a dirty word, and justifiably in a lot of instances, and move it to something that's really positive, that creates really good outcomes for local communities.
Okay. Wow. It's a big vision, man.
Yeah, but
what do you think are the some of the kind of like biggest kind of obstacles and opportunities to move through to bring this vision to life?
I think the reality is that we have not won some opportunities where frankly things have been aligned for us, because at the end of the day money is still in most instances the governing, the driving decision. I think there are definitely instances where we think that the outcomes that we can deliver would far exceed maybe the developer that's been given the opportunity, and that's come down to the fact that the system still ultimately requires the person that picks the developer to pick the best land value. Only so far can people go and saying, actually, yes, I'm prepared to receive a lower return, be it in pursuit of those broader outcomes, even if in the long term that might be a short-sighted decision. I think that's still the reality. So I think fundamentally the challenge is that we need to work out how to refine our proposition and our model such that we can be as competitive as your traditional development model, which is arguably maximizing economic value creation, often which often doesn't stay locally. And I think that's changing. I think that comes from, even in the last 6 months, the shift in the approach to finance. So the two key gatekeepers, in my opinion, are those people that own the land and those people that provide the funding, right? Because everything else sort of flows from those two parameters. And I think we are really starting to see a shift in the finance world. I think where we're at the moment is that no longer is it really acceptable to invest in something that isn't ESG positive. I think the next phase is to start seeing how we can create the conditions in which people are saying, actually, no, I'm prepared to invest in these outcomes and thereby take a lower return in order to realise these outcomes. So I think if that changes, and I feel like that's happening, I feel like we're on the cusp of that shift in the finance world, that's when really exciting things start to happen. But more broadly, I think, it's about giving the tools to, say, local authorities and other bodies the capacity to procure for these outcomes. We're doing a lot of work in trying to help these organisations set up their procurement in such a way that they get the response from the developers that allows these things to come forward.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. It's gonna be an interesting road ahead of us in these coming months. But I feel like Corona is bringing up a lot of exciting opportunities for people to kind of realign their values.
Yeah, I think it's a big reset. So I was speaking to a friend of mine who works for one of the major banks, and what he was saying was that historically, when the status quo was being maintained, it was very difficult to make change. Now that the status quo has been thrown out the window and change has had to happen, be that accepting that your traders are going to work from home, or accepting that you're gonna have video calls where previously you would have either met in person or you would have had a normal phone call. The sort of the willingness to accept change, that threshold has suddenly increased. So suddenly it's much easier to say, well, also we should be doing something around the environment, because now people are like, oh yeah, we've changed and it wasn't that difficult, and we're now in a sort of a state of change. So I think this is the opportunity to capitalize on those changes, and I think that's why we're starting to see it. We're seeing massive change in regulation in terms of green agenda, and that it's great to hear people's moral stances on things, but frankly, regulation is what's going to be needed. At the end of the day, the system is not going to change unless the rules of the system are changed, and that's what the role of government has always been: is to interfere in these imperfect markets in order to pursue these broader ambitions. So it's great to see so much regulation coming in. But yeah, this is a period of change, and capitalising on that in such a way that we can make positive changes in other areas is a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, amazing. Well, James, I really appreciate you taking the time. And for when we put this out there, what's the best place for people to find out more about you and Stories?
Yeah, probably our website, which is stories.partners. That's probably the best place. We don't perhaps do enough in terms of putting ourselves out there, but again, it's very much about the places. It's the schemes that we bring forward and the people at the heart of those. Their stories, hence the name of the business, that's more important for us.
Exactly. Well, amazing. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, no, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's been lovely to chat.
Yeah, cool. And we'll be in touch soon.
Amazing. Will you enjoy the Bali weather?
I shall, my friend.
Good stuff.
Thank you so much.
All right then. Cheers.
Talk to you later. Bye.
You too.